Linda, after 22 years, we're restructuring. Your role is no longer needed. The words came cold, flat, delivered by a man half my age who hadn't even bothered to remove his smartwatch notifications while ending my career. His name was Trevor Myers, new operations director, shiny degree, expensive suit, and absolutely no understanding of the gears that made this company run. I sat still, letting the silence linger. The HR manager shifted uncomfortably in her chair, avoiding my eyes. I see, I said simply. No begging, no questions. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. For more than 2 decades at Crestline Logistics, I had built routes, solved breakdowns, recovered shipments that could have bankrupted clients. I had lived through 3 CEOs and 5 warehouse expansions. Every late-night call, every storm reroute, every customs mess at the border. I'd been there to fix it. And now, dismissed like a misdelivered package. I gathered my things quietly. A framed photo of my daughter, Emily, at her college graduation. A chipped coffee mug with a fading sunflower design. A stack of notebooks, each crammed with handwritten details of routes, vendor codes, and system quirks no one else bothered to remember. Younger employees glanced at me as I walked back to my desk, then quickly dropped their eyes to their screens. Some of them had been trained by me, guided through their first crises. They knew the basics. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't understand the shortcuts buried deep in our custom routing software, or the way I'd set up shadow logs to catch inconsistencies in vendor billing years ago at the request of the legal team. I did. Bethany from procurement stopped me in the hallway, her face pinched with sympathy. Linda, I just heard. This is insane. You practically run this place. I managed a small smile. Companies change direction. She started to protest, her voice rising, but I hushed her gently. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not here. As I handed in my security badge, Trevor stood outside his office door, arms crossed, watching me leave. No handshake. No thank you. Just making sure I actually walked out. But as I stepped into the elevator, a thought settled in my chest like a weight, or maybe like a spark. They had no idea. For 22 years, I had been the most thorough person in the building. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, but the one who documented everything. Every vendor change. Every system update. Every unusual pattern in payments. What they had overlooked, what Trevor was too arrogant to even consider, was that I still had records. Copies. Backups. I walked into the parking garage, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and sat in my car. For a moment, I looked at the concrete building where I had given so much of my life. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, calm. If they thought discarding me meant erasing me, they were mistaken. I started the engine. Wednesday was coming. And Wednesday would be very interesting. The morning after my dismissal, I sat at the small oak desk in my home office. For the first time in 22 years, no alarm clock had dragged me out of bed, no commute waited for me. Just silence. My husband, Mark, set down a cup of coffee beside me. He didn't say a word, didn't ask questions. After 30 years of marriage, he knew when to give me space. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out a flash drive, one of several I had kept secure. Years ago, when the company's legal department asked me to design an audit process to detect vendor irregularities, I had insisted on maintaining external backups. They had signed the approval, then promptly forgotten. But I hadn't. I plugged in the drive, and my screen filled with rows of spreadsheets, logs, and email archives. To most, it would look like endless columns of codes and numbers. To me, it was a story. A story written in invoices, approvals, and timestamps. I scrolled through familiar vendor names until one caught my eye, Midwest Supply Partners. On paper, they were a trucking subcontractor. But the payments had a rhythm that didn't fit. Small at first, then increasing each month, like a heartbeat accelerating under stress. Who are you? I whispered to myself. A quick search pulled up a registration date from just a year ago, with a mailing address that led not to an office, but to a strip mall P.O. box. My pulse quickened. The invoices weren't outrageous. 10%, sometimes 15% above normal rates, but over time, they added up. And the approval chain? Every single one carried the digital signature of Harold Bennett, Crestline's chief financial officer. I leaned back, the leather chair creaking under me. So this was it. They hadn't just pushed me out for being outdated or redundant. They'd needed me gone before I could connect these dots. Trevor's smug face flashed in my mind. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting the fraud. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Maya, one of the younger coordinators I'd mentored. Linda, I'm so sorry. Everyone knows you carried this department. It's not fair. I typed back a simple reply, thank you. Keep your head down. I didn't tell her what I had found. Not yet. Instead, I copied every file, every payment log, every approval. The total came to nearly $2 million siphoned over 18 months. I stared at the final figure until the numbers blurred. Years of loyalty tossed aside, and for what? To hide a scheme they thought no one would ever notice. But they had forgotten about me. At that moment, I wasn't just an unemployed middle-aged woman with a box of desk trinkets. I was the one person who knew their systems inside out. And I had the receipts, literally. The question wasn't if I could expose them. It was how. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The city skyline shimmered in the late morning sun. Trucks rumbled on the expressway in the distance, carrying the lifeblood of commerce. Crestline thought they had cut me loose. But I was still here, still watching. And I was about to remind them that the quiet woman in the corner had always seen more than anyone realized. Wednesday was getting closer. By Tuesday afternoon, the weight of what I had discovered pressed on me like a stone. I sat in my living room, files spread across the coffee table, each document screaming one undeniable truth. The fraud was deliberate, and it was massive. But the part that chilled me wasn't the money itself, it was the pattern. The approvals, the timing, the slow way payments had increased, as if testing the system. Whoever designed this scheme had confidence. Too much confidence. And that meant someone powerful was protecting it. I pulled up the company's organizational chart, the most recent version I had quietly saved. Harold Bennett, the CFO, had sole approval authority on those invoices. But he wasn't working alone. His access permissions had been expanded about 18 months ago, right when the suspicious payments began. Expanded by none other than Trevor Myers. So that was it. My dismissal hadn't been about restructuring at all. Trevor had been planted in my department for a reason, to edge me out before I could notice the very scheme I had just uncovered. I poured myself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly as I set it down. For 22 years, I had lived by a simple rule: do the work, keep the company moving, don't rock the boat. But now I realized I'd been sitting quietly while others had learned how to exploit my silence. They thought I'd go home, lick my wounds, maybe look for another job. They thought I'd disappear. Instead, I printed out copies of the payment records and tucked them into a manila folder. Then I slid the folder into a fireproof box I kept under the stairs, alongside our passports and home insurance papers. If anything happened to me, Mark would know what to do with it. I checked my phone again. A new message blinked from Maya. Linda, weird thing today. They're locking old files. Even stuff from before you left. Whole departments are complaining. Did you know about this? I stared at the screen. They were already covering their tracks. No, this wasn't random. This was war. I drafted a short reply, Maya, don't get involved. Just keep watching. After I hit send, I sat back and let the idea settle. The fraud wasn't just some sloppy skimming off the top. It was calculated, shielded by executives who were already preparing to bury the evidence. But they didn't realize who they were dealing with. I still had access, not through company servers, those had been cut off, but through back channels I had built years earlier when IT needed redundancy. Quiet systems mirrored logs, hidden backups. Trevor hadn't even noticed them. Why would he? People like him never thought the old guard had teeth. I opened my laptop, logging into one of those mirrored systems. And there it was, not just Midwest supply partners, but 2 other vendors with the same pattern of billing. Different names, same tactic. Nearly $4 million siphoned in under 3 years. My breath caught. This wasn't just Bennett and Trevor lining their pockets. This was a network. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it sharpened something inside me. A focus I hadn't felt in years. They had built this scheme believing no one would ever challenge them. They thought loyalty made me weak. They were wrong. I closed the laptop, a calm smile forming. Tomorrow was Wednesday. The board would be meeting for their quarterly reviews. And I knew exactly where to aim my first strike. Wednesday arrived bright and ordinary, the kind of morning that hides decisive moments. I dressed in a plain blouse and the blazer I only wore for big meetings. The one Mark teased made me look like I meant business. I drove to Crestline and parked a few blocks away, preferring the anonymity of distance. Up close, the building buzzed with the weekday rush, loading docks, delivery vans, the steady clack of heels on tile. It looked exactly the same as always. That was the point. I carried only a slim laptop and a single printed summary in a slim folder, enough to make a credible noise without looking like a crusade. My plan was surgical, not dramatic. Make them react, watch which names slipped, which hands trembled. Truth is a poor liar. Put enough of it in the right place, and the rest unravels. At 9 a.m., the board meeting began. I watched from a bench across the street, pretending to read a book. Through the glass, I could see them, executives in precise suits, settling into the boardroom as if they'd never done anything wrong. Trevor took his seat with the studied calm of someone who thinks the chessboard is set in his favor. At 9:15, I made my first move. I didn't send an accusatory blast or a sensational expose. I sent a quiet, verifiable note, an email, from an address I'd set up years ago for system testing. It went only to the chair of the audit committee, a woman named Evelyn Hart who had a reputation for following paperwork to its last comma. The subject line read, "Preliminary flag, unusual vendor patterns, immediate review advised." Inside, I included a short, clinical summary of the anomalies, vendor names, dates, payment increases, and a single attached spreadsheet that mapped the money. No drama. No flourish. Just facts. If Evelyn was the sort who chased details, she'd look. If she ignored it, the pause in her voice would tell me everything I needed to know. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. A single line from an unknown number. Who sent this? Evelyn's assistant. That was good. That was what I wanted. Trevor left the boardroom suddenly, as if called to an urgent hallway talk. A red flag for me. He hadn't expected outside scrutiny yet. The room tightened. I watched as the CFO, Harold, rushed into a private office, his jaw set. Men who hide money rarely keep steady hands. By mid-morning, things began to transpire exactly as I'd mapped them in my head. Evelyn asked for the digital trace of approvals. Someone mentioned Midwest Supply in a voice that didn't quite hold. Legal counsel whispered about following procedure. The executives began to fracture, their careful composure curdled into rehearsed explanations. At 11 a.m., the building's internal messaging lit up. An emergency request. Freeze payments to suspicious vendors pending audit. My pulse ticked at a normal pace. This was not chaos. It was dominoes beginning to fall. But the best part of the plan wasn't the first email. It was the breadcrumb trail I'd left. Shared copies on mirrored systems, printed summaries at safe locations, automatic delivery of an aggregated report to a trusted ally on the board if anything untoward happened to me. I was careful to make my trail appear like the work of a meticulous employee, not a vendetta-driven saboteur. Evidence framed as duty, not vengeance, had more bite. By 2 p.m., security escorted 2 executives into conference rooms for questioning. Trevor's face had gone pale. Harold's expression was guarded, anxious. I kept my distance, watching from the lobby as people shuffled, whispered. They were beginning to understand that someone had played the long game, and they had been outplayed. Late that afternoon, a message arrived on my phone from an old colleague, Robert Chin, a board member I'd worked with years back. Evelyn has the documents. We're calling an emergency review. Meet me. The meeting that followed was terse and efficient. Robert studied the printouts I'd left and asked precise questions that cut straight past the noise. He nodded at the spreadsheet, then looked at me with something like respect softened by surprise. "You were thorough," he said. I let him have that small satisfaction. I'd never wanted pyrotechnics, I wanted remedy. The difference matters. As I drove home that evening, dusk softening the skyline, the city felt different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because something inside them, something crooked and hidden, had been exposed to light. I had not engineered a public spectacle. I had nudged the system in a way that forced those with power to do the one thing they loathed, look through their own books. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without the dull ache of being unseen. But the game was not over. When men with everything to lose start to panic, they can become dangerous and crafty. I had made my opening move. Now I had to prepare for their countermoves. By Thursday morning, the silence broke. The first call came at 8:07 a.m. from Crestline's HR director. I didn't answer. The second came minutes later from an outside number I recognized as legal counsel. I let that one go too. My coffee was still warm in my hand when the third call came, Trevor. His voicemail was sharp, clipped, like a man trying to sound calm while his throat burned. Linda, whatever you think you're doing, stop. You're in violation of your separation agreement. We can make this easy. Just call me back. Except I had signed no separation agreement. That detail alone told me how rattled they were. By mid-morning, a formal email arrived, stamped with Crestline's letterhead. Cease all contact with company employees. Return any files in your possession immediately. Any further action will result in legal proceedings. I read it twice, then laughed quietly. They wanted me afraid. Instead, they confirmed exactly how cornered they felt. I spent the rest of the morning tightening my plan. The mirrored system still hummed quietly in the background, capturing every attempt they made to scrub records. Each deletion request, each file lock, each desperate change left behind a digital fingerprint. They were digging their own graves. At noon, Mark returned from running errands and placed a sandwich on my desk. They're calling nonstop, he said. You're not answering? Not yet, I replied. They're not ready to listen. Not the way I need them to. At 1 p.m., a new message blinked into my inbox. This one wasn't legal boilerplate. It was personal. From Harold Bennett himself. Linda, I think we should talk. Off the record. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. No need for this to escalate further. I stared at the screen. An arrangement. That was code for hush money. For silence. I typed one line in reply. The board deserves transparency. Don't contact me again. Then I hit send and sat back. My heart pounded, but not from fear. From control. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was dictating the pace. By 3 p.m., Maya messaged me again. Linda, the office is in chaos. Trevor is snapping at everyone. Harold looks like he hasn't slept. They pulled us into an all-hands, but wouldn't say why. What's happening? I hesitated before answering. She was young, too honest to hide her worry. Finally, I wrote, stay quiet. Watch. You'll understand soon. That evening, as the sun set behind the Chicago skyline, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Mrs. Harper, a voice said smoothly. It was Harold. I want you to think carefully. You're up against senior leadership with resources you can't match. If you let this go, we can ensure you're well compensated. Severance, benefits, perhaps even a consulting role. You'll be comfortable. Comfortable, I repeated. The word tasted bitter. You stole millions, Harold. From the company, from shareholders, from the people who trusted you. And you think I'll take a bribe to look the other way? Silence on the line. Then his tone hardened. You're making a mistake. This could end very badly for you. I let the pause stretch. Then I said, evenly, it already ended badly for you. And I hung up. Mark watched me from across the room, his brows knit with worry. You're poking a bear, he said softly. No, I answered. I'm trapping it. That night, I loaded my full report onto 3 separate encrypted drives and mailed them to different locations, one to a cousin in Seattle, another to a former colleague in Denver, and one to a safety deposit box. If anyone thought they could silence me, they would find the evidence louder than ever. Friday's board meeting would determine everything. And when the board opened their laptops that morning, they would find something waiting. Friday morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of autumn day where the air felt like glass. I didn't set an alarm, I didn't need one. By 8 a.m., I was already at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, waiting. At exactly 8:05, the first signal went out. My mirrored system, still linked quietly into Crestline's old audit logs, triggered an automated email. Every member of the board received the same subject line. Before approving bonuses, review attached. Inside was the full report, vendor invoices, approval signatures, mirrored logs, even copies of Harold's expanded permissions. I had left no gap for excuses. Every number pointed back to the fraud. Every trail ended at Trevor and Harold. By 8:20, my phone began buzzing nonstop. Unknown numbers, board assistants, legal extensions. I ignored them all. They weren't who I needed to hear from. At 9 o'clock sharp, the board's emergency finance committee convened. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I had my eyes in the building, Maya, my quiet observer. Linda, she texted. Something's happening. Security pulled Trevor and Harold into separate conference rooms. Evelyn is leading the review. Everyone's whispering. I've never seen the place like this. I let myself smile, just a little. The dominoes were falling. By 9:45, another message. Harold tried blaming, accounting errors. Evelyn shut him down. Trevor looks sick. Board members are furious. This is huge. I pictured it, the polished boardroom, the panic under their expensive suits. For years they had hidden behind jargon and authority. Now the math betrayed them. At 10:15, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Mrs. Harper, this is Patricia Graves, Crestline's general counsel, a clipped female voice said. The board requests your cooperation. They take your information extremely seriously. I've already cooperated, I replied evenly. Everything they need is in the report. And everything I have is backed up in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, it will be sent to regulators and the press automatically. A pause. That won't be necessary. Her voice softened. Executives are being placed on leave pending investigation. The board would like to meet with you directly. I'll think about it, I said. Then I ended the call. At noon, news alerts began flashing on local business feeds. Crestline Logistics executives under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet, but anyone inside knew. By mid-afternoon, the stock price had dipped, analysts were buzzing, and the company's leadership looked more fragile than ever. Then, at 3:30, my phone buzzed with a call I hadn't expected. Robert Chin. It's a bloodbath in there, he said without preamble. Harold broke first. He's blaming Trevor, says he was pressured into approving invoices. Trevor's denying everything, but the logs are clear. The board is furious. Evelyn is leading the charge. They want to see you, Linda. Not as a suspect, as a solution. I sat back, the weight of his words settling over me. For 22 years, I had been invisible. Overlooked. Dismissed. Now, the same people who had cut me loose wanted me back at the table. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something colder, steadier. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because men like Trevor don't fall quietly. And I had no intention of leaving the job half-finished. Monday morning, I walked into Crestline's headquarters for the first time since my dismissal. The security guard, who once barely looked up when I passed, now straightened immediately. Welcome back, MS. Harper, he said, handing me a visitor badge with careful respect. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet. I had never been invited this high before. My world had always been the warehouses, the routes, the midnight calls to rescue stranded shipments. Now I was expected in the boardroom. 10 directors sat around a polished oak table. At the center, Evelyn Hart folded her hands neatly. Robert Chin gave me the faintest nod of encouragement. Across from them sat the interim CEO, her posture stiff. Ms. Harper, Evelyn began. Thank you for coming. The information you provided was thorough and decisive. Because of it, we've suspended Mr. Bennett and Mr. Myers. Law enforcement has been contacted. Early reviews suggest nearly $5 million siphoned over 3 years. Without your diligence, this would have continued unchecked. I said nothing, letting her words hang. The board has unanimously voted to create a new position, she continued, Chief Integrity Officer. A role with audit authority across all departments, reporting directly to us. We'd like you to consider it. I placed a slim folder on the table. These are my conditions, I said. Independent budget. Veto power on financial technology. Full authority to investigate without interference. The interim CEO's eyebrows shot up. That's highly unusual. So is stealing $5 million, I replied calmly. Unusual problems require unusual solutions. The room fell silent. I stood. You have until noon to decide. I have other offers. At 11:46 a.m., Robert called. They've agreed to everything. 6 months later, I sat in a corner office overlooking Chicago's skyline. Harold had pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud. Trevor was fighting charges, but drowning in evidence. Smaller accomplices were turning state's witness. Most of the money had been recovered. I had promoted Maya to lead daily logistics operations. She was sharp, loyal, and needed someone to believe in her the way no one had believed in me for years. A knock at my door pulled me from the quarterly audit reports. Mark stood there, smiling. Lunch. I closed the folder and grabbed my jacket. As we walked through the halls, conversations quieted, not from fear, but from respect. They knew the story now. They knew I could have burned the company down, but instead I'd forced it to rebuild stronger. In the elevator, Mark squeezed my hand. Happy? I thought about it. The anger that had driven me during those first days after being fired had faded. What remained wasn't joy, not exactly. It was something steadier: satisfaction. Completion. I'm good, I said simply. Outside, the autumn sun warmed our faces. My phone buzzed with a new message from Evelyn. Budget increase approved. Unanimous vote. I smiled faintly and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Bridges don't always need to burn, I thought. Sometimes you let them collapse under their own weight. And sometimes, if you rebuild them right, they can hold more than they ever did before.